Okay. So we'll start. Okay. Well, good afternoon, and we're now into the final half of our final summit, and really the next three sessions this afternoon is focused on accomplishments, hearing some insights from our breakout work as we all contributed to that, and then what's next and what are we going to look forward to. So the order is kind of really important. I think that over the course of the last 3 days, we've heard a lot of good things, a lot of positive attribution, particularly to the year of polar prediction and the special observation periods and how they have provided a lot of benefits. There's a panel here that have graciously accepted to share some insights from their own perspective on what we've accomplished over our last several years. And in particular, I thought I'd start with asking Neil. If you saw, there was a few pictures. I saw one this morning that is actually in this book, Year of Polar Prediction, Achievements and Impacts, which was kind of the organizing session of the Polar Prediction Initiative. And Neil was there. And I know that Neil had a strong role in penning the implementation plan that has led to all of this great work. So I'm going to ask Neil to start. He has a few presentation, a little organized, that he'll share with us. So Neil.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And can I first say how delighted and honoured I am to be here, not only on this panel, but here for this week, because having been involved for so long, it's just such a joy to catch up with people and to see the passion of everybody here and in the project. And I think, you know, we're talking about YOPP accomplishments, and we've got it here. It's documented. It's brilliant. It's I feel like in some ways that you know, I was involved from the start in sort of producing a child, if you like, that was sent out into the world and has really done well. So you know, well done, guys. Now, in the context of the YOPP accomplishment, I do though want to go right back to the very beginning, not as far as Gilbert. But back to the design of the project, and it was Gilbert who enticed me to work on this after my retirement from Met Service in October 2011. And I was conscious right from the very start that in starting to set up the first meeting with Thomas, that we needed to get the fundamentals right. If you like, when you build a house, you build some foundations first and you put more stuff on top of it. You don't go halfway through building a house and go back and change the foundations. So it was important, first of all, the very first part of the foundation is the mission, if you like, the mission statement of what we were trying to achieve. And there's an interesting word in that very first version of what I sent around to the steering group that was getting formed, the word coordination. So I think at the time we were sort of thinking, oh, well, maybe we'll set up an umbrella, we'll have, you know, Polar Prediction Project, and there's a bunch of stuff going on anyway, and we'll call it part of the Polar Prediction Project. But we quite quickly moved on to decide from our first kick-off meeting in Geneva that mission for the overall project will be to promote research, enabling and development of improved services, etc. And I think there we're already starting to think what we want to do is make the pie bigger, if you like. You know, we're trying to get more activities going rather than just relabeling existing activities. So there was the first meeting of the group. There's a number of people there who've been here this week. I'll say something more about that shortly. I'll also like to say just for a second that the results of that meeting were shared very widely. This was a part of the first attempt to actually get out there and make it widely known amongst other scientific areas, and I think we even sent it to the PRs of all the countries involved in both North Pole or South Polar activities to really start promoting what was going on. So you should have been here maybe having a meeting of the Polar Intensive Observing and Modelling Period Final Summit. Back in, I've got 6,000 emails, by the way, if anyone wants to go back through the history. And on 17th of January 2012, I sent out this email to the steering group saying, oh, yeah, we should maybe call it Polar Intensive Modelling, blah, blah, blah. And I'd like to credit Ian Renfrew sitting in the front there. He came back within a few hours and said, why don't we call it Year of Polar Prediction or something? Which I'd like the idea, interestingly, provided it doesn't imply it's just a 1 year rather than decadal effort. And as we all know, we now have years of polar prediction. Yeah. Thomas had liked the idea, and Thomas said it sounds dynamic, at least to Germany is, and so we decided to use it and go forward to our next meeting, which was in Montreal, where we started talking about setting up the YOPP itself. Interestingly, there's 14 people in that picture of the second meeting in Montreal. Of those 14 people, 8 have been here this week. So that shows some continuity of effort and interest in the project. At that meeting, we set up a YOPP goal. I won't go through the detail, but it's sort of highlighted there in bold. But the important thing is that, again, trying to get the fundamentals right from the beginning was that the final goal is very, very similar. So again, we're trying to get things locked in as early as we can and get them right. I'd encountered a mind mapping program called iThoughts, and if anyone's had some interactions with Thomas, they will know he uses that a lot. For what it's worth, this is the very first mind map that Thomas sent me when he started using it in July 2012, and it's a bit small, but if you look at the detail, you'll see that already in July 2012 we were mapping out what we pretty much have now as YOPP in terms of the preparation and the core phase and the consolidation phase. And we even happened to be sitting, for what it's worth, at what was then called the YOPP Synthesis Workshop. Next meeting was in Reading, the European Centre, and just a comment that it was appropriately icy that time. The next meeting we had was the very first YOPP planning meeting back in Reading in June, where we had a workshop, and again we're starting to involve more scientists and sort of sparking interest in this. One of the people was Florence Robier at the time, not the director, talking about observations in the Antarctic region. Next meeting in Boulder, and we're starting again to sort of grow the group, and this I think was the first meeting that Matt Shoup was involved in. And one of the joys again about being here is in-person meetings and chatting in the corridors and chatting over coffee. There is so much work that can be done that is then eventually put into practice when you start writing documents and things in the formal meeting. But it's a lot easier to do that in person rather than trying to do it in Zoom, shall we say. We had a large number of meetings involving Arctic things in Helsinki in April 2014. Again, at this point, I think we started involved. The British Antarctic Survey came along for that, and we were talking to user groups. We had people involved in Arctic icebreaker services and those kinds of things. And also, I think some Indigenous people were represented at that meeting as well. I managed to miss a meeting in August, but the next one I went to personally was in Barcelona, where we had this very important topic of linkages between the polar and mid-latitude regions, which is one of the reasons, of course, that the plans are eventually said for polar regions and beyond, to really emphasise that point about the influence of the polar regions on mid-latitudes and the tropics. Once again, just to highlight the fact that these conversations and brainstorming sessions taking place in person works a lot better, I think. And finally, the YOPP Summit, of course, that we've heard a lot about, where, as Thomas said, we even had the Scandinavians coming on their summer break, and you can see the number of people there. So we really are now starting to, if you like, expand this umbrella, grow the community, grow the interest. And that was followed by, again, some chats and discussions, and that was where you can see in red there, at that meeting we added the user engagement and education activities to the mission statement. final meeting I went to personally was the steering group in July 2015, just immediately after the summit. And that was very, very important. A number of things happened. One was the YOPP endorsement process, which I think everyone probably agree has been key to sort of the win-win-win of projects which were going towards the goals of YOPP, projects which could then be funded, and the funding agencies were very happy to be involved in that because of the YOPP is now a brand, a brand which has a good name and people want to be on board with it. That was really fantastic. And also at that time, I think YOPP Southern Hemisphere was invented with Dave Bromwich being invited or told to start it up. Just to go back briefly, again, to emphasise the involvement of partners, this was a list of the people who presented in Geneva. I mean, it's quite a list of, this is not just the scientists and so on, it's other organisations, other institutions who are becoming very interested in this. So just a final slide. I really just want to summarise it from my perspective in terms of YOPP accomplishments, what has been important and maybe should be important going forward as well for whatever comes after YOPP. This whole idea of foundations, I think it's really, really important to get things right from the start, as right as you can. And maybe we've got that foundation already for what we've done so far. People is really important. We've been blessed, I think, with having very, very good people involved in this project, and particularly Thomas Young. He's just been a fantastic leader, a fantastic thinker and strategizer and gainer of funding and everything. In the early days, and I've got the emails to prove it, we were going to put in some terms of reference for the steering group, which said that steering group members should rotate off and no one should be chairman for more than about 5 years. And boy, am I glad we never got around to that, because we might have lost Thomas, and I'm glad he stayed through. So thank you, Thomas. The other thing is connections. I mean, connections between disciplines, connections between the scientists and the service providers and the users, but also connections out to these partners. So it's all about breaking down those silos, breaking down those walls, and connecting with everybody you can. I think in this document it's referred to a little bit as the community as well. And I think finally another important thing that's been really important for the achievements is having the International Coordination Office, providing the glue, if you like, of the administrative glue of arranging things, coordinating things, providing promotional materials and publicising everything. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We've, in one aspect that you talked about is, bringing that umbrella and embracing a large community of science. I'm just going to break my order because I was going to ask Machiel to speak next, but I think I'm going to ask Taneil to make a few comments on, particularly when we think about how we've advanced kind of over this last, for me, I guess we started a decade, but the science, I guess, has been pretty intense maybe in the last 5 or 6 years. But if you thought about naming a few things that if you wanted to put down in the record to say what we've accomplished, from your perspective, what would they be?
Well, I think that the major thing that we accomplished is you just described, Neil, a lot of different meetings. And I think at these meetings, people workshop and brainstorm, they come up with ideas, they come up with objectives. But the actual implementation is very, very difficult. And to have the implementation, you have to have the people who are going to be hands-on, working with taking observations, doing these model, assessments and testing. You need to have the data people who are the programmers and stuff like that. And unless they are supported by their individual institutions, or you have somebody on these original planning groups who has got some control over some research entity, like I have a research group with 10 or 12 people, and I became involved with YOPP basically because Chris Farrell was on those very original meetings, And I was in his office reading his implementation plan, just sort of idly flipping through. And he said, oh, we're going to take all your observatories and we're going to do this, you know, intensive comparison with models. And I was like, how do you ever think you're going to do that? I mean, the data's all over the place. It's different institutions. Getting it in one place is never going to happen. And then Gunilla came and had lunch with me, and she kind of pitched the same idea and is like, okay, this sounds important. But I was able to build a team of people both throughout, you know, the YOPP community, but then also very importantly with my own research group, so I could move forward. So I guess I feel like we've had some bridges built and some infrastructure, and we saw from Øystein's presentation this morning that's stretching all the way through now into this whole data ingest and portal and distribution system. So I'm kind of forgetting what the original question was, but I guess the question I'm going to answer is the important thing is figuring out how the people who are actually going to do the work get pulled into this. And I feel like that's a major accomplishment, is that we have managed to do that now with YOPP. And the question is, how do we not break those linkages? We take advantage of those foundations, and that PCAP or PCAPS or whatever doesn't have 17 meetings over 3 or 4 years, you know, talking about what they want to do, but realize that we need to finish up what we've started because we're really well on our way now.
Thank you. I'll go to Machiel next. You know, one of the, I wouldn't say it was necessarily unique, but it was certainly unique to this process, was from the very beginning, there was a focus on ensuring that whatever we learned or whatever we were to gather from, say, the natural sciences and better processes and better models, that it really needed to have an application, there needed to be an engagement with the user communities, et cetera. I wonder if you want to share, because Sarah was a rather unique for WMO to attach something like this so specifically to this initiative. But if you might want to comment from your perspective, where you see some of the major accomplishments from, including how significant it was to think about this from the very beginning.
Thanks, David. We started basically in 2015 when we received an invitation from Jackie Dawson, who had been invited by Brian Mills to form a CERA group. And we were a group of people that you could say, well, let's say many of us were kind of new to the field. There were only some of us who were actually working on some of these issues from the social sciences perspective, because it's quite a small niche, like the social science of polar prediction, specifically, you could say. We really started from scratch, and we also had to take a bit of time in the beginning. To really scope out what is going on, to build a community, and to develop expertise. Right, that has taken a couple of years in our case. So even though, you said we started from the beginning, it was 2015, and so the process was already underway, and we had to also move quickly. And what has really helped us was to have an annual meeting for this group, to build our own group, but to also reach out to user groups in different parts of the polar regions or in areas close to the polar regions, and to get acquainted with what type of questions are important, what type of research is already taking place, and we really learned a lot in that process. That has been really very interesting. We really got great insight from these interactions between social scientists, service experts that were part of our group, and also user groups. What really helped later on was to have, it was that several of us really, got some dedicated externally funded projects, let's say, going, that were, let's say, social science driven, right? That has been really important. Because it is in these projects where we could also innovate, right, in this field. And these projects were, well, mostly, you could say, around marine sectors and around indigenous people, let's say, interests. What we felt, and that is also an accomplishment in my view, it was a growing appreciation, right? Maybe in the beginning, in all the meetings we had, in the steering group meetings, in the science workshops, etc., we were still searching a little bit for, you know, like, how do we connect to all of this, right? Where do we fit in? And because it's largely like a physical science, let's say, world, and let's say communication between social science and physical science is can be quite a challenge. I'm sure you also experienced that when you listened to one of my presentations, anyway. But what I want to say is that what I've seen over the last couple of days is really that we have grown in that respect, right? That if I look at the program of the final summit, then I'm very proud with what we have accomplished. So I think that's kind of a, how do you say that? A signal, like a signal, you know, that we have accomplished a lot, both in terms of research that we're able to present, but also in terms of you know, that we're able to stage also end users here and user groups, and that they can also, that we are able to show you how important, let's say, user engagement and well, the societal, let's say, part, the use part of all of these activities are. I think that we have built a momentum also from our perspective. That's also part of the accomplishment. So we have been going up so far, and it would be really a waste if it would end now, right? I think we have created a momentum for starting to do more, for more engagement with users, for more engagement between the sciences, for more engagement with service provision. So finally, and that's kind of related to that, is that I think over the years, from 2015, let's say, onwards, but also I'm sure you've experienced that as well, we have been building networks really across disciplines, across the world. And I think it's time, or it is really important not to let it end there, but to try to continue on that basis and to really reap the benefits from that, because I think there will be great benefits.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I would agree, actually. You know, we listen, really in many of these presentations, there were elements that cut across the importance of the users, even if they weren't dedicated to the user discussion. So there were many good things that came out. You could say this whole process is a success in itself, that this community has come together, as well as virtually participating in this. So, Jonathan, I'll let you comment on something else, but I want to give you something specific, and also for Vicki. You know, in the beginning of this process, you know, I wasn't back in where Gilbert was describing it with initial thoughts from Thorpex, but when we were part of the this panel that WMO put together, brought experts together to look at what we could do better to support basically polar regions and eventually high mountains. One important dimension that was brought up, and it was actually presented to Executive Council as well as Congress was the importance of engagement of early career scientists. And I wonder, we see sort of a perspective from here. I see lots of youthful faces here, people that I've never met before. And it strikes me that I wonder how successful we have been in our educational outreach. I mean, they had a YOPP summer school. I remember they had that session with the whole idea of making sure that we focused on this intergenerational development so that there would be strong scientists. So how do you feel we did? What would be your score in from that perspective? And then I'll ask Vicki the same question.
Sure. So I guess there are two sort of aspects to it. There's the more sort of structured sort of program that we had as part of PPP and YOPP. So we had, what was really good early on was that sort of Apex, obviously, you were involved in setting that up during the IPY, and so there's a really good group that was like an obvious point of contact to engage with. And so I was lucky enough to be invited to a steering group meeting at ECMWF, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and I turned up incredibly underdressed with like having just cycled in a hoodie and wearing a t-shirt and some jeans with a bit of like chain oil on, and I hadn't quite realized how differently the meteorologists dressed compared to climate scientists. So. And it turned out that it was a really good opportunity for me. I think I was very much in the right place at the right time, like working on the right sort of thing, and so it was incredibly good for my career. But I was, and I ended up sort of chairing the education task team, and we organised a couple of polar prediction schools, which were great. If I do say so myself, like I had a lot of fun, and I think that was sort of 60. They had 60 people in the Meech, and I know of at least sort of 4 people that ended up having jobs with, or maybe not 4. I know a few people that had sort of jobs directly as a result of like people that they met at those schools, and I think and obviously a lot of connections were made between the scientists, and I think that was really beneficial. I think the pandemic. I sort of passed it off to sort of Claire had a really it was a bit of a hospital pass, I think we call it in the UK, just before the pandemic, and I think it's been I think you've done a great job sort of organising the early career day. I've heard really good things about it from the Sunday, but I think that's probably sort of hurt things a little bit, although there's been a lot of efforts to organise sort of things regardless of that. But I think it's also really important that so you can do that. You can sort of provide schools and provide a good program. I think we did a good job of that. But I think for me personally, I think being provided with the opportunity to be involved in a leadership position, a bit like Matt Shoup was talking about with Ed Blanchard-Rigglesworth this morning with the SIP-in stuff. Having the opportunity to be involved in that leadership can really do a lot for somebody's career. And I think it definitely resulted in, probably a job and a couple of projects that probably wouldn't have been involved with otherwise. So I think it's quite important that we find ways to provide those leadership experiences, the opportunities.
Okay, thanks very much. So Vicki, you can maybe share a few thoughts on particularly that aspect, but also. You've have a very strong, you're working on a PhD, mid-career, I guess you'd be mid-career, but working on a PhD, and part of, why you were motivated to sort of focus in on this area might be helpful in clarifying why this would be a great success for this organization.
Yeah, sure. So probably a little bit of my background that I haven't really talked about is that I have worked for the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia for nearly 20 years, and most of that time was as a weather observer, which is then when I got to go do winters in Antarctica. So that's when I learnt people were very weird. I also learnt that people make strange decisions around weather. Weather observing has been taken over by technology, so I decided it was time to change my career. I was going to go do the maths because I hadn't done that in science. Found that not very exciting, learning online, and ended up finding psychology and the science of human behaviour and why do people do the weird things they do and respond to warning messages or not, and all that kind of side of things, which led to my honours and now my PhD which is bringing together the kind of Antarctic and the human behaviour sides. So I actually learned about PPP from Scott Carpentier, who many of you may know, from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, and the fact that there was a social science element. So then I kind of went and read the Navigating Weather report, and that pretty much was the inspiration for my PhD. So I was late to the party. If you're all consolidating, I'm starting. And so I started my PhD in 2019. So through that, just the outreach point of the PPP, and I think, as you were saying, the APEX and PPP relationship has been really successful, I think. I had the experience with Claire pulling me into the ice pods with Kirsten and Sarah, and we did the live ice pod for the SCAR Online workshop a couple of years ago. So that was a lot of fun, if a bit scary. And then I think in some ways starting later was an advantage because I walked into this fully functioning team. My supervisor knew Daniela, so we kind of had that connection across the ocean to Australia and New Zealand. And then I was kind of pulled straight into the PPP task team. So that's been invaluable in terms of knowing what's happening, other kind of discipline knowledge, and also what the projects and things like that, as well as being able to see what's happened with international collaborations and how these things work. And also alongside that, there was the YOPP SH, like with Dave Bromwich. So I was going to those meetings even if I didn't necessarily know about all the process and the forecasting science. But, when it came time to saying, how are we going to do the TOPS and the winter special observing period, and because of structural changes and people being on leave within the Bureau, it's like, well, if I don't say something, we're not going to get balloons to Antarctica in time to be able to do the TOPS. So I think sometimes it's just serendipity that you're in the right place. So, that whole how international programs work and how WMO to some extent works. I think less successful has been the Antarctic Sierra work, just due to lack of funding. They've had the meetings where they kind of started to learn and start to form relationships with the Antarctic operators, but we heard yesterday, the tourism industry is where they were during those meetings in 2019, that we have no dedicated weather services, or, we need weather service improvements. And then when you look at the sea ice, there was a sea ice challenges workshop in 2015 with ComNap. And then again, yesterday we hear, well, sea ice is still a challenge. There's not been that science impetus, and there's also, to try and do something like the Salient Seas project, there was just no appropriate funding for Daniela to be able to apply for. We didn't tick the right box on the square chart of what real science might be in Antarctica. So yeah, there's challenges, I think, in the policy and the framework of how we make research funding available still to go.
All right. So I'll leave an open question, and so whoever wants to volunteer can speak first. And if no one does, I'll appoint somebody. And this is, as obviously during this period, there have been challenges. We've had great successes, but there have been challenges. And I wonder, particularly as we think about, say, the panel at the end of the day going forward, I think it would be really important to think about what those challenges that we have experienced during this process that could be identified might help us with how we put together, say, our input for PCAP. So with that, maybe someone might want to start. Feel free. 1, 2, 3. Oh, first person holds the mic. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind now is maybe something I already touched upon, but is a kind of, let's say, finding a common language, so to say, between disciplines. Like, I must say that I've been sitting in many meetings where I have really tried, but had a hard time following like what it was about. I found it really something that I really, really appreciated was in the presentation by Greg Smith, right? The keynote that he had a lot of science results, but then also in the top it says like this is related to this a user need, right? That helped me understand. Okay, like that is what we are talking about. That helps to let's say to place it, right? For example, it's just a small thing that can help in that sense. I think there's still in meetings like this or in projects like this, even though we want to be talking to peers, I guess, and that's what we are expecting that we are doing, we have to keep in mind that there are different types of peers now, let's say nowadays in these fields, right? And maybe, let's say taking a small step, a small gesture in that direction helps a lot for getting a message across and so on. So that is one. Another one, and I'm sure that that's one that would come up anyway, is the kind of COVID challenges that we have experienced. It's a completely different thing, although it also relates to communication and working together. I don't think that for international collaboration projects like this one, let's say COVID has been a very good thing, right? In terms of the energy that you feel in these initiatives, etc. So that is another thing that in my experience, like this week has really done a lot in that sense. I really feel energized again for the Polar Prediction Project and for the thing we are working on, just because of the fact that we're able to meet and to interact and to discuss in person, right? So that is another challenge, that it's really important to have meetings, right? We can have online meetings in addition, but this is really essential.
Okay. Yeah, so let's go to Taneil, and then we'll work our way back.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing mic management.
I want to elaborate on what you said, and I would take that even farther. I was very taken with the comment that we heard yesterday from the people who came to do just our entertainment, and the woman who said that she went and looked at the posters first and that she wanted to get some ideas, pick up some talking points to bond with us before she did the entertainment. She said she went to 4 or 5 posters and went, And I think that we, on a different levels, have that problem with ourselves talking between disciplines, talking to social scientists, on the very machines talking to each other. I mean, that's why we've spent all this time on these merged observatory and merged model data files so that they can communicate. So I think we have to have that in all levels. And ranging from what we're doing with these technical NetCDF sort of protocols and schemas, but then also having posters, and you're going to be required in your presentation, required on your posters, required in your reports, to have one sentence that says what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to talk about a challenge which in some ways is not unique to this particular project, but the challenge is one of volunteerism. and that is that we all have day jobs. I don't, but you do. In the sense that when an activity, when WMO teams, WMO groups, meetings, and I'm talking about the meetings like I was discussing here about coordinating things, the resources have to be allocated for that person to attend that meeting. And quite often I'm well aware that means probably working evenings and nights and weekends on that sort of stuff, and also time away from the sort of day job back there. And that's common. So it's not unique to this particular project or YOPP or everything. But it's a bit like the branding, if you like, of YOPP and the way that its mana, if I use a word from New Zealand, grew, was that I think if it's seen as sufficiently important, and if the management of the institution you work for says, oh yeah, that's an important initiative, we want someone on board with that, you're more likely to get time allocated, so it's not going to be completely volunteer, but it's going to be, they don't mind you're working on that and going to 3 meetings to plan something in 1 year and whatever. So I think that's an important point for me, important challenge.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to kind of pick up on what Machiel and Taneil were sort of saying about this kind of slight disconnect, and I guess that's one of the areas where like from, and you all also mentioned it a bit earlier about this sort of need to have potentially like meteorologists coming out and not like quite having the end sort of service bit, or there being something a little bit missing in terms of that sort of translation to exactly what the end users need. And I think we did sort of talk a bit about trying to sort of incorporate sort of a bit more of the sort of the end user and social science into this training, and I don't think we didn't really get that in the end, did we? And I think maybe that's something that could be a good area for development going forward.
Okay, thank you. Vicki?
Probably the first thing came to mind was time zones. We all know from Zoom, and we know that Australia is a long way, and it's midnight over there at the moment. Particularly for parts of Europe and Eastern Canada, those really miserable time zones for trying to connect. But the other thing is a little theory called unconscious bias. Basically that we naturally and normally, and it's human nature, that we'll gravitate to those we know and those who are similar to us, whether it's gender, your discipline, or your ECRs, as someone going through my experience, how you're sitting at your tables out here. Which it can be a good thing to work towards these big projects that you build your consensus in a team, but it can also be a problem. You look at climate change research, and there was a paper a few years ago looking at how it's funded. The physical scientists had received 770% more funding, and social science on climate mitigation strategies. Climate change is essentially a human problem. If we can't get people to change their behaviours, we're not going to be able to address climate change, had received 0.12% of research funding. So yes, we bang on about funding, but this is why. How can you build a consensus with one person working in climate change information? How can you look broadly across decision-making in Antarctica? Daniela had a student who was brilliant. She worked in the tourism industry, interested in, could extend what I'd started to find out, but no funding for her PhD. Had to stop the project. So it can be a real issue. So that would be my point about funding.
So just on this funding issue, I mean, it's, when you look inside the booklet, you can see that YOPP's been pretty successful, both from getting some governance to support the meetings from various sponsors, mostly country sponsors, but they've also been successful through fundraising, through various, EU processes and some other third-party processes. So the success of this project depends on, how well researchers are being supported. Is there anything that you would think of or would like to share that we could do better at either better support, and Vicki's point about social science, that could be one, but is there something as we take sort of our new initiative to WMO that we could share a message to say we could have been a lot better, we could have accomplished more if we had support? Is there any kind of message you may want to share? Here's an opportunity. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I think it's quite difficult to sort of turn like research projects into operational services, like the SIPIN project was one. It's had sort of been successful at like getting project a few times, and then it's kind of coming to the end now. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's a massive community resource. And I mean, I don't know what would happen if it doesn't get funded, but that's kind of like not a nice situation to be in for something which is so important. The creation of these MODF files, it's kind of a research project, but in order for it to be really useful going forward, you'd like it to be adopted, you'd like it to be, you really need somebody to sort of take it on in an ongoing sense, so that it can be so that you get the most out of all of the effort that's gone in. I'm sure there's there's hundreds of examples like this.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Like one of the things that comes to my mind is like we had this project Saliencies, and what was good about it was that we were able to, and that's pretty unusual, we were able to collaborate with maybe 4 or 5 partners in Europe, right? And what was also good about it, because normally in national funding it's only partners or mostly from your own country, and in European projects it's always 25 or 30 partners. Also impossible in my view. So, like Thomas and Stefan, they are managing this. But what was good is let's say 4 or 5 partners. Then you can really let's say focus on something. What was also good about that funding, it was the ERA 4 CS funding, so the European Research Area for Climate Services, a program, so a joint planning initiative. Was that these projects, we were not, let's say, held really strictly to all kinds of deliverables that we had to deliver, basically, right? We got some freedom in that project, right? Which meant that you have the freedom to experiment. To find out along the way what the product will be, and that is sometimes for these kind of products, or let's say services or oriented aims really important. That you do not really know yet if you start to collaborate with users what it is that they want and what precisely it is that we have to deliver in the end. So more freedom in that. And just trust, basically, from funders, that when you put a couple of smart people together, that something will come, something good will come out of that. Because we're all, I mean, as researchers, we're not people that are going to take the money and go to Curacao, right, to sit on the beach with it. We're just not like that. So we will do something good with it if we have funding. So that's an important message, I think.
It's actually a beautiful island. I've been there a few times, Curacao. Beaches are good. Okay, I've got one sort of last. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. Maybe ask each of you to say, maybe your last thoughts. But I'd also like you to include in that, if you think that we've missed anyone. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to go to Vicki's comment about we kind of gravitate to those we know. And their community is maybe, relatively small, but maybe not. And the question is, as we think about going forward, what would we recommend? Like, are there groups, or do we need to do something more about widening the circle of contributors as we may look to the next 10 years? So your last thoughts, and then if you could just reserve a comment on that, that would be useful. So we'll start with Vicki, and we'll work our way back down.
So one, I think as soon as I came into the PPC era work, that kind of hit me once I'd read some of the literature, looking at the synthesis paper we're trying to do, that is that aviation, I know from my experience in Antarctica that that's a key factor. Ken Borick, who work in Canada, work in the Antarctic at all the stations. People, as 2015, I was at Mawson, and a very well-known pilot, the Basler crashed, people died. So I think even though aviation services more broadly within WMO is very regulated and very, commercial services very highly paid, what model forecasting models and what other information, things like surface definition and other things that might be factors, do we need to look at and, ask them some questions as customers. The pilots I spoke to say they really appreciate the service, so it's more that, the accuracy for some areas and locations over Antarctica, and I'm sure the Arctic, what else is there? What can we do to help? We've had massive engagement with shipping and sea ice, and that's been where many of the advancements have been with technology, but who else is out there?
I guess in terms of final thoughts, I mean, I think, I think one of the big sort of successes for PPP has been this sort of shift to sort of coupled atmosphere, ice ocean, NWP, and I think it was, it's something that was like a big issue for PPP. I think everybody knew that there are all of these large errors associated with having fixed like persistent sea ice conditions, and I think now three of the global forecasting centres have coupled models. I think that's I think that PPP has definitely accelerated that and helped coordinate that, and I think that's a big paradigm shift for our field. But I think there probably still isn't. There's still a lot of like quite sort of fundamental problems that need fixing with our models, and I think it's model development doesn't. I don't think there's as many people doing it as you think there are in any of the institutions that are involved in it.
Yes, like there's different ways of answering that question, but the first thing that popped in my mind is like, who are we missing? I thought Kirsten Werner is who we are missing, and Thomas, of course, for the accomplishments. So that's what I mean, but also for the science communication, right? And really important that has been, and she has been her role in that. And one of the, there are certain areas that I'm thinking of as well. For example, you mentioned already education, and then you have education in meteorology, but you also have, for example, let's say a maritime schools and training, right? There's also a link to be made there in my view, a link with the IMO, for example, and how we can build that, and how we can make sure that training and using particular products can be, can be higher on the agenda there. And maybe finally in my view, we are just also in the PPP Sierra group, we're just a couple of people with a particular social science background, but there's particular disciplines that are missing too that could be really beneficial, like economics, not really represented currently, right? that's just one, right? That I'm thinking of. That could also generate really a lot of insight and answer important questions around the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this was last thoughts as well as gaps. Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, like
Given the
who's
time.
not here was the question.
Yeah. Oh, who's not here? Services. This is a research project, and legitimately, and welcomely, we've got Sarah and trying to, talk to user communities, and understand their needs, which can then help drive the research, and we then have a good understanding of what the services gaps are. But it's not a services delivery project. So I'm wondering whether there needs to be more of a connection, in the WMO context, it's now the New Services Commission, talking about what new aviation products could be provided in the regulated system, talking about what new marine or products or tourism or local communities and so on. So the rubber hits the road, if you like, when those services are operationalised through other means, not through a research project.
Okay.
I guess my final two comments, one is going to be programmatic and one is going to be visionary, I hope. The first, I'll do the programmatic one first, and I'm just sort of summarizing what everybody said and what I heard Thomas saying over and over again in the PPP steering group meeting we just had. There has to be a succession plan. You've heard people like Matt Shoup and Thomas and myself who are saying, this is a great thing, it needs to keep coming, but somebody else needs to pick up the flag and carry it forward. And it needs to be the young career people. The young career people can't do it without support. They need to have financial support. They're typically not going to be senior enough so that they can do it as make it part of their day jobs, or get people that are working for them do it as their day jobs. So that's my first programmatic thing, is the succession thing. And the visionary thing is a question is, we're doing a great thing, we've gotten a really good start, but does there have to be a little bit of a shift of focus? Are we now in an emergency situation with these extreme events that are happening all around the world? And we were talking about improving forecasting, but do we need particularly to focus immediately and with great urgency on these forecasting these extreme events? Because I suspect that we can get climate forecasting better, you can get like the run-of-the-mill weather that's going to happen be better, but it could be that there really has to be a focus on these events that are out on the tails with extreme precipitation, extreme dryness, extreme winds, and extreme blizzards, in the Arctic. And those are probably going to be the hard ones to catch, and because there could be actually different processes driving those.
Well, thank you very much. I think a lot of good points were raised during this discussion of the panel. So let's thank the panel for sharing their insights. I think for those who are taking notes, if there are any, I think legacy issues are important. You need to recognize you've got to capture the value out of this process to ensure that it finds a place in the new process. So I think it was a key message that came out of that. I think another key message that came out had to do with maybe broadening the ring, recognize critical groups that have a dependency, particularly those who operate in the Arctic. Aviation was given as an example, but I think as we think more and more about that, and then how do we make outreach, and maybe that's a component that we could reflect on, how do we make outreach into those communities useful? Something that wasn't shared, but I'll share from my own experience. The World Climate Research Program has more than one proponent, it's not just WMO. It has the IOC, makes sense, but also has the International Science Council. And they're there because they wanted to ensure that the funding agencies that are in all these countries would adopt the World Climate Research Program as part of their priorities. So this is an aspect I might ask you to think about within the World Weather Research Program, particularly this initiative, where I believe that the various international science unions can be influential on how they can kind of support these kind of priorities going forward. And I think the issue that was raised about ensuring there's funding for early career scientists so that they can be engaged and that they can have long and fruitful careers and advance the knowledge we need for the Arctic, I think is a key aspect, needs to be built into the next initiative. All the things that you touched on were all contributing to the success that we have had in this last 5 years. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll invite the next group up.
Thank you very much. Let me see it in the mic. I want to thank also David Grimes that agreed to lead this panel. This has been great. Thank you.